Imagine you're standing on a tiny solid patch, just 1 square meter in size in the middle of an endless swamp. A quagmire of liquid clay, sand, and stones. It's raining. Any step in any direction will lead you into the quagmire, from which you won't be able to escape. All around, as far as the eye can see, there isn't a single solid patch of land except for the little spot you're standing on. What will you do?
How will you save yourself?
How did you even end up here? Hello, this is the Epoch of Disbelief channel. How can you find out what's hidden underground at great depths without the help of a gear radar? How can you find hidden structures if you have no way to go on an expedition, and if the law even forbids you from simply digging? I'll tell you about this in this video. It's a kind of life hack for researchers. But to understand how this method works, we need to understand how buildings ended up underground in the first place, what happened in the past, and how events developed. And at the same time, we'll answer the question of how some historical artifacts appeared. And today I'll start my story with the already overused topic of the Great Flood. No, I won't try to prove that it happened or speculate about when it happened. At most, let's suppose I'll talk about what it might have been like. And then we'll move on right away to where reality is so fantastic and insane that I simply have to make a statement. Everything I say and show next is my personal opinion and may very well contain mistakes. Be sure to share your opinion in the comments. It allows me to look at the problem from a much broader perspective. It's no secret to anyone anymore that almost all the cities on the planet are covered with a thick layer of clay and sand. And it's not just the cities, practically the entire planet is covered. In previous videos, we've already calculated, using very modest estimates, how much material has been dumped onto the planet. We found the likely culprits, sand and clay asteroids of the Centaur and Apollo classes. We even modeled how it all happened, and into which stages the catastrophe was divided. And even in one of the previous videos, I showed some articles from periodicals of that time, which hinted at one of the episodes of the catastrophe that had occurred. At the same time as describing the catastrophe, I told you the story of a mysterious city, to which for unknown reasons, everyone who could be bothered had been flocking over the past several hundred years. Taganroga. According to my assumption, it was near this city that Alexander Makedonsky was buried. We even found, using an old map, a huge burial mound located exactly in the place indicated on the old map. Details and links to them are in the hints in the description of the video. If you haven't watched it yet but are interested in why I'm making such confident conclusions, please watch it. I hope that I described my point of view there clearly enough. However, we need to move on, right? If someone is really buried in the Tsar's Kurgan, then why hasn't anything been excavated there yet? And why, just a kilometer away from it, was the new city of Tanais built on the ruins of destroyed buildings? So let's go step by step. How do you imagine the past clay flood, Dozhachek, the hurricane that came out of nowhere? I'm afraid it was all different. It was much more dramatic. The rain with clay fell from the sky for quite a long time, many days. And as usual to this day, after a while, people got used to it, just as they get used right before our eyes to bombings, poverty, wars, tsunamis, epidemics. You have to go on living, and people did. And how would you behave if a rain of mud started falling from the sky? What if there's nowhere to escape from disaster? It's the same all over the planet, even in the most remote corners. Most likely you would just stock up on patience and supplies, lock yourself in a sturdy stone house, and try to wait it out.
Before the arrival of the storm on Florida's southern coast, schools and beaches were closed and public transportation was suspended. Trailer parks and campgrounds in low-lying areas were also evacuated. Authorities opened shelters.
A real tropical downpour hit Primary, and the regional capital Vladivostok was literally flooded. In the largest city of the region, public transportation was paralyzed, including due to mud flows that occurred in several districts, damaging dozens of cars. Impressive footage from Vladivostok in the report.
And so another day passed. Mud filled the streets and avenues, but then it flowed away in a stream. There's nothing to be afraid of anymore. Yes, it's unpleasant, but the walls are sturdy, the apartments are cozy, and the supplies of food and water are substantial. You just have to endure it. It's dangerous to go outside because not only fine dust falls, but sometimes even larger stones come down. And a mud flow, even if it's below knee-deep, can knock you off your feet. And there's nothing to do outside anyway. Even breathing is dangerous. The air is full of moisture mixed with fine particles of dirt and dust. That's how time passed. People got used to staying at home, and the fear gradually began to fade away. Only the irritation remained from wondering, well, when will all this finally end? And in the meantime, rivers of mud filled the lowlands, clogged the sewers, and accumulated in natural or spontaneously formed dams. And then on the third, fourth, or fifth day, the clay finally filled everything it could. It accumulated in naturally formed dams, filled them to the brim, and finally broke through. This could happen at any time of the day: morning, afternoon, evening, night, even during deep sleep. By that time, most people could no longer leave their homes, except maybe through the windows. The level of mud was already almost a meter high. The burst mud flow quickly gained the strength and power of a tsunami. And this time, it wasn't just some little rain, but a devastating wave of clay and water, destroying everything in its path. Carrying with it, among other things, millions of tons of rubble formed from destroyed buildings, or simply larger pieces of rock that were picked up along the way and crushed into tiny fragments. And people were already trapped in a situation from which there was no escape. From that moment on, all the people who were in their stone houses could do was wait and pray that the level of the mud flow would not rise above the roofs of their homes. As we already know, some people managed to brick up the windows and openings on the lower floors. This once again shows that people knew about the disaster in advance and were preparing for it. And judging by the nature and level of the clay layer in different regions of the planet, the clay tsunami reached different heights. This is related to the natural slope of the terrain or natural barriers and basins. In Peru, for example, this flow apparently destroyed and buried absolutely everything under itself, and once it solidified, formed the flat Nazca Plateau. But in Europe, the flow in some places did not exceed 3 to 5 meters. But we got distracted. Now imagine yourself in the place of a tormented person in the second or third week of this apocalypse, waking up in your room on the second or third floor of your house, from the fact that the whole room is already covered with a layer of dirt, and he continues to stay there. All the lower floors were filled up a week ago, but you managed to seal them off in advance, so they're holding up. And now the dirt has started to spill out through the window of the top floor. You have nothing else left. For now, the flow isn't rushing. It's filling the lower floors through the staircase. You quickly gather all the essentials and, either alone or with your whole family, make your way to the last remaining line of defense, the roof of your house. What you see around you is horrifying. You are standing in the middle of an endless sea of moving clay and mud, which rises higher and higher with every passing second. Now it has already covered the entire roof, and you are standing ankle-deep in mud. And to your right, to your left, all around you, on the same small islands of hope, stand other people, hoping that God will have mercy and that all this will finally end. Someone can't take it anymore, takes a step, and the current carries them away forever. You realize that there will be no salvation. The whole planet is in this state. The only thing you can hope for is that the clay dries as quickly as possible and you can somehow move across it. And until then, you'll still be stuck in your little spot. You are very cold. After all, before this, you were always wearing tunics, but with the start of the global rain, the temperature on the planet dropped sharply. But still, you just have to stand there because there's nowhere to go. This goes on for many hours. Someone on the neighboring islands can't take it anymore and tries the clay by touch, attempting to walk across it. A step or two, and the person disappears headfirst into the swamp forever. And in the evening, the rain with clay starts again. It's lighter now, but it still goes on all night. You are very cold, and you are tormented by hunger. You no longer have the strength to hold the child in your arms, so you set him down in the ceramic pot that has been emptied of food. Several more days pass like this. During the day, you hope that the clay will dry, but by nightfall, the dirty rain starts again. In the end, after 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, you can't take it anymore and lie down right in the mud, curling up from the cold. You no longer have the strength to resist, and you fall asleep forever. And the rain with clay keeps falling. It's not as frequent now, and the flow has weakened. The ground has leveled out, and there are almost no slopes left. Now it just keeps rising higher and higher, and now your body's already covered by a layer of mud. Somewhere this layer was very thin, 0.5 meter to 1 meter, and somewhere else it was 5 to 10 meters. Finally, it was all over. The main mass of clay was already on the ground, and finally, for the first time in a long while, the sun appeared in the sky. The water-saturated clay began to dry out. The upper layer became dense rather quickly, but inside the mass of mud, there were still millions of tons of water. This water couldn't escape through the fresh, dry crust on the surface, so it began to seep downward, forming underground water arteries and aquifers. The clay, having lost most of its water, decreased in mass and volume and began to settle in different places on the planet. The settling was different. It depended on the total thickness of the clay layer, the amount of water in it, and where and how the water was leaving. But nevertheless, the settling was significant. In some places it was 1 meter, in others 5, and in some places even more. The water went where it didn't meet any resistance, and it bypassed the denser areas underground. Such areas were the bodies and the structures that retained their geometry, especially the structures. The clay covering them couldn't go anywhere. It simply had nowhere to go. And then hills began to appear from under the ground, former rooftops of buildings, and beneath many of these hills lay the shriveled and crushed bodies of the unfortunate, and whatever they managed to take with them, hoping for salvation. Some people just had food, while others took all their valuables with them, hoping to start a new life with their help. Such hills will later be called burial mounds, and beautiful legends will be invented about shamans or warriors who are buried there. The burial mounds repeat the shape of the structures buried beneath them, so some look like star-shaped fortresses, while others are in the form of round mounds. Some structures were only partially buried and are still functioning to this day. Entire cities ended up submerged by oceans and seas that overflowed their banks, either completely or partially. In some places, the water receded, in others it did not, but most of the structures are buried forever. Only children survived for the most part, those who were able to be the first to cross the barely dried up swamp. Factories ended up buried underground, and even if some maps remained, it became impossible to find them without any landmarks. Civilization was reset,
People remained?
but all knowledge was buried forever. It was necessary to start from the very beginning. Is there a way to see what is hidden underground and restore its original appearance? Well, or at least to know where and what to dig? Of course, nowadays they use ground-penetrating radar for this, but in the past they just dug up the burial mounds. And how is a kurgan different from an ordinary hill? Yes, basically there's no difference. Only a more or less regular round shape. In the middle of a field, a steppe, or in the forest, start digging and you'll almost certainly find a burial. And there will definitely be gold and valuables. Everything that was valued, people tried to take with them so they could have something to start a new life with. 100 or 200 years ago, people did just that. They dug up burial mounds and took the treasures they found for themselves. But this quickly came to an end. And not because there were fewer burial mounds or because they had become empty. No, someone really didn't want and still doesn't want us to dig. Even now, Article 19 of the law on subsoil is an administrative and criminal offense. Digging deeper than 5 meters is strictly prohibited. However, that didn't stop specially trained people from being sent to excavations since the times of Petrovsky. I talked about one of them in the video False Tenais. Under the guise of historians, they simply loot burial mounds, taking everything more or less valuable and not caring about preservation or restoration. They are the ones who invent legends that we believe in hundreds of years later and which are even forbidden to question. So what should we do? A ground-penetrating radar is very expensive, starting from 1.5 million rubles and up. A satellite-based ground-penetrating radar is completely out of reach financially. And no one will give you permission either. And even if you splurged on renting a ground-penetrating radar, which is also very expensive, who will let you scan their land? And it's not even about the history. Put yourself in the landowner's shoes. You scan something there, and then people in suits come and take your land away. However, there is one way. No one has tested its reliability and accuracy yet. Well then, let's give it a try. And the same water and clay will help us with this. And the cosmos. Earth, soil, clay, loam, sand. There are many types of soil. But if, of course, it's not Chernozem, then they mainly differ from each other only in the proportions of sand and clay content. Somewhere there's more sand, somewhere there's more clay. And on top of all this, it's covered with a fertile layer of soil, which farmers diligently plow and use to grow crops. It seems like everything is clear. Rain waters the earth, the water penetrates into it and partially nourishes the plants, partially evaporates, but most of it goes deeper as much as possible. And what happens next? And then the water reaches the densest layer and begins to slowly flow toward the nearest river, lake, or sea, thus forming underground aquifers. Yes, in fact, underground water eventually forms those very rivers and streams, bursting out from beneath the ground as springs, creating ravines and riverbeds, and then continuing to flow along the surface. So, what am I getting at? The point is that dry and wet soil have different colors. Dry soil is lighter while wet soil is darker. Satellite images clearly show how water is distributed across plowed fields. You can clearly see the formation of underground streams that will eventually form future ravines and rivers. You can see how these underground rivers continue into real ravines and rivers, where they come to the surface. Water comes out of the soil unevenly, sometimes merging into a stream, and sometimes when it encounters a denser object underground, like a stone, it flows around it. This is where the realm of speculation and assumptions begins. At first, I was sure that finding a clean field without any suspicious underground densifications or formations would be easy and simple. But it wasn't that simple. In the overwhelming majority of cases, from space, you can see a lot of underground densifications and formations on absolutely any field. However, it's hard to confidently say that this is not just some stone, but actually a structure. And here the history of satellite images from space helps a lot. The underground formations we need do not disappear after plowing, sowing, or harvesting. Time does not affect them, and they retain their correct shape and proper location. Now let's try to apply this knowledge, for example, to the Royal Burial Mound near Taganroga and try to model what actually lies beneath it. First, let's look at its height. The relief profile shows the true height of the mound is 11 to 12 meters. The mound is not round. It is somewhat flattened from north to south and has sides of 100 meters by 85 meters. By the way, these are the exact dimensions of a football field, even a little wider. Excavations have already been carried out on this mound. But judging by what we observed during a small expedition to it, all the activity was limited to attempts to dig a passage to its center. After that, since this apparently didn't work, the mound is quite large, it was decided to make several test pits and boreholes from the top down, again exactly in the center. The drilling depth to the general ground level was 12 meters. And judging by the fact that the mound is still standing, they didn't find anything there. Or the findings didn't inspire the searchers with optimism. That's exactly how it should have been. After all, according to our theory, after 12 meters, the searchers should have, at best, only reached the roof of the buried structure. However, this is the minimum value. Practice shows that, in reality, the roof can be even deeper, at a level of 18 to 20 meters, or maybe even more. Literally, the entire surrounding area speaks about this. The layer of sand and clay in this region reaches dozens of meters. By the way, it's the same map by Guillaume de Lille from 1706, which is actually how we found it. This mound tells us that there used to be mountains here, which no longer exist now. Thus, I am sure that beneath this mound, there is a huge structure with a dome 100 meters in diameter. Is that a lot or a little? Of course, nowadays they build domes even bigger. There are domes up to 300 meters in diameter. But there is only one ancient building from that era that can even remotely compare in size to this structure. It's the Roman Pantheon, and it's
Oculus. Inner.
The diameter of the dome reaches 44 meters, while the outer diameter in some places is up to 58 meters. A colossal structure created by ancient architects from concrete. But even it is half the size of what is located under the Royal Mound in Taganroga. Here is a tomb worthy of Alexander, but why is it not round, but oval? The answer is banal and simple. It really got flattened. This could have happened something like this. At first, the building quite withstood the onslaught of the clay tsunami. First of all, thanks to its spherical shape. As is known, it is precisely this shape of the structure that provides the most correct and even distribution of loads across the entire surface, which allows the building to withstand very large external forces. This is exactly how the famous arches work. Thanks to their curvature, the forces acting from above are smoothly redistributed to the supporting columns. That is why subway tunnels also have a round profile, and even wells are lined with concrete rings. They have to withstand about the same pressure from the ground. Yes, even water pipes have a round profile for the same reason. Thus, the tiniest Pantheon could withstand the onslaught of the clay tsunami for a very long time. From above, in satellite photos, we can see that there is another ring of dry land around it. It is quite possible that there was a similar circular wall surrounding the Pantheon. It was the one that took the first main blow. However, after some time, the clay began to overflow, and when it filled the inner space between the temple, the pressure on the wall appeared from the opposite side, from inside the ring. As strong as the spherical shape is from the outside, it is just as fragile from the inside. By the way, this is the principle behind an ordinary egg. It's not so easy to crush an egg from the outside, but from the inside, it's much easier to break. And now the wall was destroyed, but it didn't completely collapse and wasn't reduced to rubble, because by that time it was already quite deep. The only thing that happened was that it split into 3 parts and straightened out a bit, which allowed the flow to move smoothly. The same thing happened with the Pantheon. While the wall was struggling to maintain its integrity, the flow speed inside the wall was very low, which allowed it to hold on until the moment when the clay began to pour into the Pantheon through the upper opening. By the time the wall was breached, the Pantheon was already filled with mud, which provided it with additional strength under compression. Thus, the seekers who were drilling this mound could have drilled 15 meters down to the roof of the dome, and having hit exactly the central opening, did not notice it. They went another 50 to 80 meters deeper, down to a level of 95 to 100 meters, and having hit the foundation of the temple with the drill, decided that they had reached bedrock, and there is nothing here. And now take a look at the satellite photo of the underground water streams near the Kurgan. Almost any surveyor would probably say that these are just underground rocks. Well, and he would be absolutely right. Houses are indeed built from stones. I could, of course, be mistaken. But what are the chances of such a perfectly regular shape, and literally within a kilometer of the real excavated city of Tanais? In some places, it's not even a kilometer, but just a few hundred meters. Let's try to build geometric models of these underground formations and bring them to the surface. Isn't that right? Very strange stones. Of course, it could all just turn out to be ordinary stones, but there are just too many coincidences in a couple of square kilometers. The desire of the Macedonian to be buried here, the founding of Alexandria Tanaiskaya in this place, strange geographical names, the suspicious activity of the Ptolemaic clan, and then the Al-Faraki clan. The strange desire over the course of 300 years for all the superpowers to possess this piece of land. The dispatch of special agents to excavate these burial mounds. And in the end, the creation nearby of a fake Tanais, built on real historical fragments. And all the surrounding fields are thoroughly mixed with stones, which are fragments of ancient buildings. On some of them, there is even preserved stucco or relief, and these stones are being walled up. They are being walled into the walls of the newly constructed mock-ancient Tanis. Friends, none of us are immune to mistakes. And if you notice a flaw in my logic, don't hesitate. Clearly, correctly, and without stumbling, leave your angry comment under the video. To be continued. Subtitles.